The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under our apartment door like a secret too heavy to knock. Its edges were worn, the handwriting sharp and deliberate, addressed to me, Elliot Harper, in a script that felt like it carried the weight of a stranger's judgment. I didn't know then that those words would unravel my life, pulling me toward a small town called Willow Creek and a confrontation I never saw coming. I'd been roommates with Caleb Monroe for 2 years in our cramped Chicago apartment, a space filled with mismatched furniture and the kind of easy laughter that made late-night takeout feel like a feast. Caleb was 25, like me, with a quick wit and a smile that could disarm anyone. A graphic designer who wore his heart in the lines of his sketches. I was the quieter one, a freelance writer who hid behind my laptop, spinning stories but never quite brave enough to live them. We were friends, close in the way you only get when you've shared too many secrets over cheap beer. But lately, I'd caught myself noticing him more, the way his hands moved when he talked, the curve of his jaw when he laughed. I buried those thoughts, convinced they were one-sided, dangerous. That letter changed everything. It was from Caleb's father, Arthur Monroe, a man I'd never met, but whose name carried a shadow in Caleb's rare stories about home. Elliot, it read, I know about you and my son. Come to Willow Creek. We need to talk. My stomach dropped. Caleb had never mentioned being out to his family, let alone anything about us. There was no us. Was there? I glanced at Caleb across the room, sketching at the kitchen table, oblivious to the storm brewing in my hands. I stuffed the letter into my pocket, my heart racing with questions I wasn't ready to ask. The next morning, Caleb announced he was heading to Willow Creek for a long weekend, his high school friend's wedding. Come with me, he said, his eyes bright with a hope I couldn't read. It's a small town, but it's beautiful. You'll love it. I hesitated, the letter burning a hole in my mind. But his smile was a gravity I couldn't resist. I said yes, not knowing I was walking into a trap set by a man who thought he knew my heart better than I did. Willow Creek was a postcard of rural America, tree-lined streets, white picket fences, and a main square where everyone seemed to know each other's names. We arrived on a crisp October afternoon, the air thick with the scent of fallen leaves. Caleb's childhood home was a modest 2-story house, its porch sagging under the weight of memory. His mother, Linda, greeted us with warm hugs and a plate of homemade cookies, her kindness a stark contrast to the cold words in Arthur's letter. Caleb's father wasn't there. He's at the shop, Linda said vaguely, her smile faltering. I nodded, my nerves tightening. That evening, Caleb dragged me to the town's autumn festival, a chaotic swirl of fairy lights, food stalls, and live music. He was in his element, weaving through the crowd, introducing me to old friends with a pride that made my chest ache. This is Elliot, he'd say, his hand lingering on my shoulder a second too long. I wondered if he felt it too, the unspoken current between us electric and terrifying. We ended up by a bonfire, the flames casting shadows across his face. I'm glad you're here, he said softly, his voice cutting through the crackle of the fire. I wanted to ask about his father, about the letter, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I nodded, my heart pounding as his gaze held mine. The next day, Caleb was pulled into wedding preparations, leaving me to explore Willow Creek alone. I wandered into a local diner, its walls lined with photos of the town's history. That's when I saw him, Arthur Monroe, unmistakable from the family resemblance, sitting at a corner booth. His eyes locked onto mine, sharp and unyielding, like he'd been waiting. He stood, a tall man in his late 50s, with graying hair and a face carved by years of hard decisions. Elliot Harper, he said, his voice low and deliberate. We need to talk about my son. My mouth went dry. I followed him to a table, every step feeling like a march to judgment. Arthur didn't waste time. I know what's going on between you and Caleb, he said, his words heavy with accusation. He's my son, and I won't let you ruin him. I stared, stunned. Ruin him? I tried to explain. There was nothing to know, nothing to ruin. But Arthur's eyes were cold, unyielding. I've seen the way he looks at you, he said. And I've heard about you. Chicago's a big city, but secrets travel fast. I left the diner shaken, Arthur's words looping in my mind. What had Caleb told him? What did he think he knew? I wanted to confront Caleb, but he was caught up in the wedding, his laughter echoing from the venue across town. That night, I couldn't sleep, the letter's weight pressing against my chest. I didn't know then that Arthur wasn't just protecting his son. He was hiding a secret of his own, one that would change everything I thought I knew about love, family, and the courage to be seen. The wedding was a blur of white roses and small-town charm, but I couldn't shake Arthur's words. They clung to me like damp clothes, heavy and cold. Caleb, oblivious to the storm brewing, danced with me under a canopy of string lights, his hand warm against mine, his laugh pulling me closer even as my mind screamed to pull away. The reception was held in a converted barn, its rafters draped with fairy lights and wildflowers. Caleb, in a navy suit that hugged his frame, was magnetic, drawing smiles from everyone around him. I watched him from a distance, trying to reconcile the man who'd invited me here with the shadow of his father's accusations. You okay? Caleb asked, catching me staring. His concern was soft, unguarded, and it made my chest tighten. I nodded, lying through a smile, unable to voice the questions burning inside me. Later, as the music slowed, Caleb pulled me onto the dance floor. One dance, he teased, his hand resting lightly on my waist. The world blurred. His breath against my ear, the warmth of his touch, the way his eyes held mine like I was the only person in the room. For a moment, I let myself believe this could be real, that the feelings I'd buried weren't one-sided. But Arthur's voice echoed, I won't let you ruin him. I pulled back, mumbling an excuse about needing air, and slipped outside. The night was crisp, the stars sharp against the inky sky. I leaned against the barn, my breath visible in the cold, when I heard footsteps. It was Arthur again, his silhouette looming in the dim light. You didn't listen, he said, his voice low but sharp. I told you to stay away from him. I straightened, anger flaring. There's nothing to stay away from, I snapped. Caleb and I are friends. That's it. Arthur's eyes narrowed, searching mine. Then why does he talk about you like you're more? He asked, his voice cracking with something I couldn't place. Anger, fear, or something deeper. Before I could respond, Caleb appeared, his face a mix of confusion and concern. Dad? Elliot? What's going on? Arthur's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he'd spill everything. The letter, the accusations. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving us in a tense silence. Caleb looked at me, his eyes searching. What was that about? He asked. I wanted to tell him, to lay it all bare, but fear stopped me. Nothing, I lied. Just small-town stuff. The next morning, Caleb suggested a hike to clear our heads. We drove to a trail just outside Willow Creek, a winding path through dense woods that opened to a cliff overlooking a shimmering lake. The air was sharp with pine, and Caleb's laughter echoed as he raced ahead, daring me to keep up. For a few hours, it felt like Chicago again. Just us, no shadows. But as we sat on the cliff's edge, sharing a thermos of coffee, he grew quiet. You've been off since we got here, he said, his voice soft. What's wrong, Elliot? I wanted to tell him about the letter, about his father's words, but the moment felt too fragile. Instead, I asked, what do you tell people about me? Back home. His eyes flickered with something, surprise, maybe fear. I tell them you're my best friend. he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That you make everything better. My heart stuttered, but before I could speak, he stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. Come on, he said, forcing a smile. Let's head back. That evening, back at the house, Linda invited us to a family dinner. Arthur was there, his presence a storm cloud at the table. The meal was tense, filled with forced small talk and the clink of silverware. Then, out of nowhere, Arthur turned to me. So, Elliot, he said, his tone deceptively calm. What's your plan? You gonna stay in Chicago? Keep dragging Caleb into your world? The room went silent. Caleb's fork froze midair. Linda's eyes darted between us. Confused. I felt trapped, every eye on me, waiting for an answer I didn't have. Caleb's not being dragged anywhere, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He's his own person. Arthur's gaze hardened, but before he could respond, Caleb slammed his hand on the table. Enough, Dad, he said, his voice shaking. You don't get to do this. He stood, grabbing my arm, and pulled me outside. In the cool night air he paced, his breath ragged. What the hell is going on, Elliot? He demanded. Why is my dad acting like you're the enemy? I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told him about the letter, about Arthur's accusations, about the diner. Caleb's face paled, his hands clenching into fists. He had no right, he whispered. Then, quieter, I didn't tell him anything. But maybe he sees what I've been too scared to say. My heart stopped. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked back inside, leaving me alone with the weight of his words. Caleb's words hung in the air, a confession I wasn't ready to process. I stood outside his childhood home, the porch light casting long shadows across the lawn, my mind racing. What had he been too scared to say? And why did Arthur think I was a threat? The next morning, Caleb was distant, helping his mom with errands while I stayed behind, replaying our conversation. I needed answers, but confronting Arthur again felt like stepping into a lion's den. Instead, I wandered into town, hoping to clear my head. Willow Creek's main street was quiet, shops just opening, locals exchanging nods like a secret handshake. I ended up at the town library, a small brick building with a community board plastered with flyers. One caught my eye, a faded photo of a young Arthur, smiling beside another man, their arms slung around each other. The caption read, Willow Creek Pride, 1990. My stomach twisted. Was this the secret Arthur was hiding? I asked the librarian, a kind woman in her 60s named Marjorie, about the photo. Her smile softened. Oh, that's Arthur Monroe and his old friend, David. They were thick as thieves back in the day. David left town years ago, though. She hesitated, her voice dropping. Folks say Arthur never got over it. My mind spun. Arthur's anger, his protectiveness over Caleb. It wasn't just about me. It was about his own past, a story he'd buried deep. I found Caleb at the park, sitting on a bench overlooking a pond. He looked tired, his usual spark dimmed. I'm sorry about last night, he said as I sat beside him. My dad, he's complicated. I took a deep breath and told him about the photo, about David. Caleb's eyes widened, then softened with something like recognition. He never talks about his past, he said quietly. But I've heard whispers. Mom says he lost someone important before I was born. We sat in silence, the weight of his words settling between us. Then, impulsively, I reached for his hand. His fingers curled around mine, warm and steady, and for a moment, the world felt right. Elliot, he said, his voice barely audible. I've wanted to tell you for so long I think I'm in love with you. My breath caught, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. Before I could respond, he leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that was soft, tentative, and electric. Time stopped, the world narrowing to the warmth of his touch, the autumn leaves rustling around us. But the moment shattered when I heard a sharp intake of breath. Arthur stood at the edge of the park, his face a mask of shock and fury. "Caleb," he barked, his voice cutting through the air. Caleb pulled back, his eyes wide with panic. "Dad, he started, but Arthur cut him off. "Get in the car. Now." Caleb hesitated, glancing at me, then followed his father, leaving me alone on the bench, my lips still tingling from his kiss. That night, the house was a battlefield of silence. Linda tried to keep things light, but the tension was suffocating. After dinner, I found Caleb in his old bedroom, staring at a sketchbook filled with drawings of Chicago. Our apartment, our late-night talks, my face. "I didn't know you drew me," I said, my voice soft. He looked up, his eyes raw. "You're all I think about," he admitted. "But my dad, he thinks us is a mistake." I sat beside him, our shoulders brushing. "Why does he think that?" I asked. Caleb sighed, running a hand through his hair. "He's never said it, but I think he's scared. Scared I'll get hurt like he did." I wanted to ask more, but the door creaked open, and Arthur stood there, his face unreadable. "Elliot, outside," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. On the porch, Arthur didn't look at me. "I loved someone once," he said, his voice low and rough. "David. We were young, stupid, thought we could take on the world. But this town, it broke us. I won't let that happen to Caleb." His words hit like a punch. I saw it now, his anger wasn't hatred. It was fear, born from a wound that never healed. "I'm not here to hurt him," I said, my voice steady. "I care about him, more than you know." Arthur's eyes met mine, searching, but he didn't respond. He just turned and walked back inside. The next day, Willow Creek felt smaller, like the town itself was holding its breath. Caleb and I avoided heavy topics, sticking to safe ground, memories of Chicago, plans for the drive back. But his kiss lingered in my mind, a promise and a question I wasn't sure how to answer. Arthur's confession had shifted something in me. He wasn't just a barrier between us. He was a man carrying a lifetime of pain, projecting it onto his son. That afternoon, Caleb suggested we visit the town's old mill, a crumbling relic by the river where he used to play as a kid. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and moss, the river's hum a steady backdrop. We sat on a rusted bench, watching the water rush by. "I meant what I said," Caleb murmured, his eyes fixed on the river. "About loving you." My heart raced, but fear crept in. "What about your dad?" I asked. "He thinks I'm going to ruin you." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He's wrong. But he's not going to make this easy." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the diner. Alone. Arthur." My stomach sank. Caleb noticed my expression and frowned. "What's wrong?" I showed him the text, and his face darkened. "I'm coming with you," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I shook my head. "Let me handle this. I need to know what he wants." Caleb hesitated, then nodded, his eyes filled with worry. At the diner, Arthur was waiting in the same corner booth, his hands clasped tightly around a coffee mug. He didn't look up as I sat down. "I was wrong about you," he said, his voice gruff. "But I'm not wrong about this town. It's not kind to people like us." He paused, his eyes meeting mine. "Caleb's all I have. I can't lose him to the same pain I went through." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "I'm not David, and Caleb's not you. We're not your story." Arthur's face softened, just for a moment, before hardening again. "You think love is enough?" he asked. "It's not. Not here." He slid a photo across the table, an old Polaroid of him and David, laughing under a willow tree. This was us before everything fell apart. I don't want that for my son. I studied the photo, the joy in their faces, and felt a pang of sympathy. I'm sorry, I said, but keeping Caleb from who he is, that's what'll hurt him. When I returned to the house, Caleb was waiting on the porch, his sketchbook open in his lap. What did he say? He asked, his voice tight. I told him everything, Arthur's fear, David's story, the photo. Caleb's eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. He never told me, he said softly. All these years, he let me think he was ashamed of me. I reached for his hand, my thumb brushing over his knuckles. He's not ashamed, I said. He's scared. For you. That night, Caleb and I stayed up late, talking about everything. Our fears, our hopes, the way we danced around our feelings for years. I want this, he said, his voice firm. Us. But I need to talk to my dad first. I nodded, my heart swelling with pride and fear. The next morning, Caleb found Arthur in the garage, working on an old car. I stayed back, giving them space, but I could hear their voices, low at first, then rising, then soft again. When Caleb emerged, his eyes were red but resolute. He's not okay with it, he said, but he's trying. That's something. We decided to stay one more day, at Linda's insistence. She cooked a big breakfast, filling the house with the smell of pancakes and bacon. Arthur was quieter than usual, but he didn't avoid my gaze. As we ate, he spoke up, his voice rough but steady. Caleb told me about you too, he said, looking at me. I don't understand it, not completely, but I want him to be happy. It wasn't approval, not exactly, but it was a start. Our last day in Willow Creek dawned bright, the autumn sun painting the town in gold. Caleb and I walked to the park, the same one where we'd kissed, the memory now a quiet anchor between us. We sat on the bench, the carved sign still there, its words, "Love finds a way in Willow Creek," feeling less like a taunt and more like a promise. Caleb leaned against me, his head resting on my shoulder. I didn't think I'd ever be brave enough to tell you, he said, his voice soft. But being here, facing my dad, it made me realize I can't keep hiding. I turned to him, my heart full. I love you too, I said, the words spilling out like they'd been waiting forever. His smile was radiant, and when he kissed me again, it was fearless, unshadowed by doubt. Arthur didn't join us for the goodbye, but Linda hugged us both, her eyes misty. Take care of each other, she said, her voice warm with understanding. As we drove out of Willow Creek, the town shrinking in the rearview mirror, I felt a weight lift. Caleb reached for my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, and I knew we were starting something new. Not just a relationship, but a life where we could be ourselves. Back in Chicago, our apartment felt different, like it held the echo of Willow Creek's lessons. We didn't have all the answers. Arthur's acceptance was fragile, and the world wasn't always kind. But we had each other. One night, as we sat on our couch, Caleb sketching while I wrote, he looked up and said, I want to go back next year. Show my dad we're not going anywhere. I nodded, my heart swelling. We'll go together, I said. Willow Creek had tested us, forced us to face fears we hadn't named. But it also gave us something precious, a chance to love without hiding, to build a future on our own terms. Arthur's story, David's shadow, lingered as a reminder of how far we'd come and how much further we could go. Love wasn't enough on its own, Arthur was right about that. But with courage, with honesty, it could be everything.